Except where them haters, where them hoes, where them throws, you know what I'm saying? Cecil.
This is why I train in martial arts. User Habseed2 asked me to do a video about the guy who is picking fights with people on the subway. You know, a lot of times when we see videos like that, where we see somebody who has some kind of obvious mental issues in the quote-unquote black community going around and bothering people, I think a lot of times some of us black people who are more functional get the guilt. We feel like, oh man, this is just making the whole black community look bad. This is what's wrong with us. Why is this happening and all this other stuff? When really, insanity knows no race. Insanity is there. Violence is there. And not all people who are insane and have mental problems are violent. And not all of the violent people are black. They just, some people are violent, they have problems, some people are mean, you know. So I'm going to include a little bit of footage from the video he wanted me to comment on. And then there's another one that I found, and when I went to look for the one he wanted me to comment on, I found one where the attack is actually worse. And as usual, I have a story associated with the worst attack. So let's get the footage that I'm quoting first.
Rip my clothes. You rip my clothes. You're gonna miss. And I'm an injured. I'm an injured. No, stop. I'm getting on the track. I'm getting on the track. I'm getting on the track. I don't care. And I punch you in your face. I punch you in your face.
To the downtown.
Tell your mother to suck my. Tell your mother to suck my. You want me to show you that I'm a different one? You want me to show you why I'm a different one? You want me to show you? Bing, 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 bing. Yo!
Yeah!
Because me and you wasn't supposed to do that. What? It was against them two. Pussy that Jamaican niggas. It was against one of them play. It was against these new jumping for them. Got him. Got him. Got him. Got him. Got him. Got him. Yeah, they trying to jump. Got him. Got him. Got him.
New York subway slasher attacks strangers with box cutter. New York City police responded to a random attack that took place on an inbound C train at the Ralph Avenue and Fulton Street stop Tuesday afternoon. Matthew Ruff told the New York Daily News that he saw a man in a denim jacket pacing back and forth. The next thing he knew, the stranger pulled out a box cutter and attacked a man sitting next to him. The first victim was O'Neal Mendez. Ruff tried to escape, but the assailant slashed the left side of his head too. The slasher fled the bloody scene, but was spotted by a barbershop employee who said the man was covering his face, talking on the phone and crying. Officers caught up with the suspect, who was identified as 29-year-old Stanley Gray, just 4 blocks from the station. Both victims were taken to the hospital and treated for non-life-threatening injuries.
See, one reason I train in martial arts is because I believe that we live in a world where people will do things and you have no control over it, and you at least want to be able to defend yourself. Can I get an amen? That was a little goofy, but you know what I'm saying. Things happen, man, and you, no matter how well you behave, someone could be having a bad day or their mind can just go. They could just get sick. Do you know, and my doctors had told me this with me, and I kind of didn't believe it. I don't know why, because they're doctors, and why would they lie to me? But I'm not excluding Tuskegee. Let's not bring that up. But, you know, just pollution can give you kidney disease. Pollution. Pollution from the air can give you kidney disease. One of my doctors was saying, that's what happened to you years ago. And then he goes, then now I see something. We've confirmed it. Pollution. What if one of these people that you see who's doing something, you know, insane, for lack of a better term, there's a drug out here called trip that makes you mentally trip. He could be allergic to trip, could breathe trip in, trips out, loses his mind, and becomes violent. When they closed down the mental ward in DC called St. Elizabeth's, there were a lot of mental patients just walking around the streets of DC, walking around. I was born in Southeast DC, but I did not grow up in DC. I grew up in Maryland. But when my mother worked for the government, sometimes we went back and forth in DC. Then we had relatives in DC. And then, like when my brother and sisters were in high school, sometimes if they're doing some kind of field trip, the departure point's in DC. So there were times when I go through DC, and you see people that have lost their minds. It's because they're mental patients and they're not confined. Or what if they're a mental patient and their medicine just stops working and nobody knows that it stopped working? You see what I'm saying? You got people like that you have to deal with. And they're not all harmful. Or sometimes, now, I'm going to say this too. You know, sometimes, let's say, this is in the non-harmful case, okay? The guy who didn't have the box cutter. Non-box cutter man, I mean, really, if the people he was harassing were more mature and if they had better self-control, they look like they're supposed to be sane. And he obviously, you could look at the guy and tell there's something wrong with him. If they weren't so sensitive and touchy and didn't have such, you know, thin skin, they could have either ignored the guy, or if he tried to do something, they could have handled it differently. Why are you going to go toe-to-toe with somebody who's clearly out of their mind? Why? Why? What are you accomplishing by going toe-to-toe with somebody who's that weak-minded? Now, if they try to, you know, if they are trying to hurt you, then you got to do what you got to do. Well, following the person off the train is not doing what you got to do. Okay? If he's invading your space, he continues to invade your space, then you have to do something. But if it's just a talking, then you don't have to do anything. Now, guy with a box cutter, that's an example of somebody that you can't do anything about that. And then he comes at you with a box cutter. I'd still say, you know, I'm going to get flack for this. Uplock. Uplock would be a technique I recommend for that. Even though at worst you would get cut here. Now at worst you might get cut along here. If you see somebody swinging something, you do that. If you catch them right, nothing happens to you. If you miss, they're going to cut you on your arm here. I think that would be better than getting cut in the head, or worse, eye or something where you could get killed. Now, I came back and put this interjection in here. Now, the box cutter person, the victim said he saw the guy pacing back and forth in a denim jacket. If you see somebody pacing back and forth and it gives you the creeps, move. Everybody in that section should have moved. Just move. Get out of that section. Let him pace back and forth by himself and call a little calm. This some guy is pacing back and forth and making us uncomfortable. Lick. Don't sit there. Move. And my story with box cutter attack is not my story. A child attacked my son when my son was in daycare. So we're talking over 20 years ago. And a kid brought a box cutter and tried to slice up his face. Now, because I trained my son in martial arts, me at that point, because he wasn't old enough to really go with any instructors, because I had been training him, slipped the box cutter attack. Now I know you internet naysayers, and no, that can't happen. You use sports to. Because I've been going over, I was like, we're going to play boxing. I used to play Muhammad Ali when I was your age. That's what I called. Anything was Muhammad Ali. You was Muhammad Ali. Let's play Muhammad Ali. Right? So I taught him how to bob and weave. I just had an inkling to teach him how to bob and weave. And then somebody tries to slice at his face. Instead of cutting him all around here, he got a little nick. And when he came home, I said, what happened? I didn't know it was a box cut until like a year or two later when he was old enough to describe what happened. He said, he tried to scratch me. I said, what happened? His fingernail grew long and then he tried to scratch me. I said, really? What do you need to do? I kicked him in the head. And he stopped trying to scratch me. I kicked him again and he ain't scratched me again. I was like, all right. I looked at him. He didn't look like he was hurt. That just didn't register with me at the time. I guess because I never had lived in a world where kids came after each other with box cutters. See, that's what happens with the first child. Just don't know how ridiculous things are around you. Because nobody in my family, when I was a toddler, came at each other with box cutters. We got the belt, but that's another story. But mama, she could have been like Bruce Lee, nunchucks with that belt. I want to make a video where now I have science that backs up exactly when your child will need martial arts. But that science does not tell you when they should start. But it's going to tell you when exactly they need it. And I say you need to put your child in training at least 4 years before the age when, according to science, they're going to need it. Okay, and it's not just a black people thing, it's a universal thing. So that's my take on the whole NYC, New York City, random attack, insane persons situation. Everybody can be violent. And these days, with all the stuff in the environment or anything, I think literally anybody can be violent if they just have a bad reaction to something that's around us. So I guess the EPA can save us if martial arts can't. Peace.